Hey guys, welcome to the channel. It's Jack with Stronghold Strength and Conditioning. And today, we've got the ultimate guide to knee pain with squats and how to fix it for good. But before we get into that, make sure you take a moment and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future videos that'll help you resolve your pains, prevent injury, and optimize your overall performance. Ready? Let's get into this. Alright guys, the goal of today's video is to take care of all those nasty knee pains that you might be getting during or after squatting in one fell swoop. So we're going to be talking about mobilities that you can perform, the structure that you need to have to begin with to set up properly, and I've even got a little bonus for you at the end, so make sure you stick around for that. But before we get into it, any key performance programming is based around a solid nutrition program as well and some nutrition guidelines. Make sure you take a moment to stop by the description and grab RECALIBRATE. These are my nutrition guidelines for mobility and human performance, and I promise if you follow these, they will help you optimize what you're doing, give you a great base to start with. So take a moment to grab that. It's free in the description. Ready? Without further ado, let's dive into the actual work here. So the very first thing that we're going to be doing today is talking through the proper setup for the squat, and that includes our spinal organization, spinal stability, and the ability to create a torsion force from our feet up into the hip, as well as some torsion from the shoulders, creating stability at the upper portion of our spinal column as well. When looking at spinal organization, we want to make sure that there's a neutral spinal position. So even our head and neck position can really play a role in our lack of mobility or the overall pains that we're getting downstream. I guarantee if you fix these things first, that 50% of the time or more, you're going to see those pain issues really resolve themselves just from fixing core strategies like aligning the spine properly and using that to create a nice base to work from. Today we're going to be talking about the feet first to start with. When we look at the foot for the squat, we want to first of all place our feet at about hips distance or just outside of hips distance for most people. Now if you're a little bit taller or if you're going for a little bit heavier squat, you might want to take a slightly wider stance with that. When I place the feet, I want to make sure that my feet are parallel to one another with no more than a 30-degree rotation out from the hip there. The reason we're looking at this is because when my feet turn out too far, I naturally lose the arch of my foot and I lose the ability to generate torque at the hip sufficiently to create stability at the hip. Lack of stability at the hip is one of the major things that plays into medial knee pain, because often we see weakness at the glutes and overuse of the adductors causing extra stress on that medial portion of the knee, specifically the MCL. So when placing the feet, we have that 0 to 30-degree angle tops. We don't want to go outside of that, and that allows us to create that torque effect. But we also have to make sure that we have 3 points of contact from the foot. The first metatarsal, the fifth metatarsal, and the heel. Those 3 points of contact are making a tripod on each foot for us to work off of and should naturally help us create our arches. We should have a natural arch to our foot. If your foot is flat, there's a good chance that first of all, you might be turning the foot out too far, but you also might lack some intrinsic strength of the foot in that ability to maintain that arch altogether. That's another video for another day where we can talk about how to strengthen the feet to strengthen your squat overall. From that, up above stream, once we have the feet placed, we need to be able to externally rotate the hips. And when we externally rotate the hips, this is going to feel like pinching a penny in your glutes or squeezing a piece of paper between your butt cheeks. Okay? So you should feel your knees actively rotate outward a little bit. You should feel the arches of your feet naturally gripping the floor with those 3 points of contact, but you should also feel a lot of tension at the pelvis itself. The pelvis is essentially the lowest portion of our spinal column. So when we talk about core stability or spinal organization and stability, we're already beginning to organize the lower portion of our spine. On top of that, I need to stack in abdominal engagement to start to organize the lumbar spine. So my glutes actually tuck my tailbone in slightly with that external rotation, creating a stable pelvis on each side. My abs actively organize the lumbar spine, making sure that I'm not overextending the lumbar spine. We'll talk a little bit more about that coming up as well. The final part of organizing the spinal column comes from our upper body here at the thoracic spine. I want to make sure my shoulders are in line from side to side, so there's a straight line from shoulder to shoulder, and I want to make sure my ears are in line with my shoulders as well, so I'm tucking my chin in. This is another common fault that you see in spinal organization. The tilt of the head back, overextending that cervical spine, often correlates to overextending the lumbar spine. So when we see those two extensions, they're usually correlating to one another. If you can organize the neck, there's a good chance you're organizing your lumbar spine as well. Your back should be packed tight, so the shoulder blades are pulled slightly down and back into that mid-range, that low trap as well, tightening the upper back up. And the shoulders are in an externally rotated position as well, once again generating torque and stability at the shoulder. So if I'm doing a back squat, external rotation of the shoulder is going to be by grabbing that bar, pulling it into the upper traps, and then turning and tucking those elbows underneath as I hold that position. A lot of times you see the elbows flaring out, which is actually internally rotating my shoulders and causing my upper spine to go in a more of a flex position, which we don't want when it comes down into the bottom of the squat position. The next place we want to look at is the movement patterning itself. So this is the organization and order of the movement as I go through it. What joints are bending first? Which muscles are engaging as I go into that movement? That type of thing. This is where it gets butchered a lot as well, and if the movement patterning is wrong, this is where we see a lot of overuse injuries or a lot of tension related aches and pains at the knee, because the knee's getting twisted and put under pressure that it doesn't necessarily need to be, because the order of movement is all wrong to begin with. So when we look at the movement patterning for a squat, after we have that nice stable setup with a nice organized spinal column and core, we want to make sure that we're able to, first of all, hinge at the hips. So a squat actually begins with a very small hinge of the hips, and what we're doing here is actually loading the posterior chain. My hamstrings act as a synergist in our squat, so they're actually engaging to begin with that hinge, loading the posterior chain. My glutes are the next important part. So once I have that small hinge, as soon as I feel a little bit of engagement of the hamstrings, I'm actively going to be driving my knees wide, maintaining the external rotation of the hip as I lower in and pull myself into the bottom of the squat. This is where it's very important that I have active hip flexors and my adductors are not trying to overtake the movement, whether they're over engaging because they're tight and overused, or because I lack the strength at the external rotators, which are my glute med and glute min in this case when we go into hip flexion. So I begin with the hip hinge, I lower into the bottom by pulling myself down with the hip flexors while my knees are driving wide. When I go to stand back to the starting position, my knees continue to drive wide. So I want to make sure that I'm continuing to pull those knees apart from one another while checking in at the feet, making sure I'm maintaining those 3 points of contact at the foot. So I'm not all the way out on my fifth metatarsal with my ankles collapsing. I have a nice solid base still, and I'm still creating torque through the floor through that external rotation of the hip. I drive all the way up and then bring the hips underneath, once again returning to that starting setup position that we took so much time to really describe in the beginning. My glutes are tight, my abs are organizing my lumbar spine, my neck and shoulders are in a nice neutral position where I'm creating torque from the shoulders and the hips while maintaining that organized spinal positioning. Okay, now that we've talked about the setup and the actual movement patterning itself, we can begin to look at the actual mobilities that we would want to do to restore the quality of your knee health right now as it is. The very first thing we want to begin working at and looking at is the joint mechanics itself. So if the knee is truly the problem, what we can do is try and address it through flexion gapping of the knee. And I like to use a banded distraction variation of the flexion gapping here. So what I'm going to show you is by anchoring a band a little bit higher on a post, maybe about hip height when you're setting it up, you can place the band directly at the back of the knee. What I'm going to do is scoot back and sit down, so I'm pulling that shin where the heel is as close to my butt as possible, and I'm planting that foot to the floor so I can feel the band pulling at the knee itself. Now the goal of this is literally gapping the knee. So we're actually creating space for the knee joint to glide a little bit better over itself to begin with. Now this might have to be related with soft tissues, but we can also just make sure that it's also a realignment of the knee in this movement. The other thing I like to do is activate the lower quadriceps muscles right above the knee to make sure that I'm able to get to full extension of that knee. When I'm extending that knee, I should be able to fully straighten that knee and have a little bit of tension, so I'm pushing back, and that's where I'm going to feel my quadriceps activating to create that movement, that extension of the knee. Now we can also use another technique such as voodoo floss or a softball at the back of the knee to create that same flexion gapping effect at the knee, but I prefer the banded distraction method to begin with if you have access to a pull-up band. Now, if not, a ball works well. It's going to create that same gapping effect, and you're going to get some myofascial release at the same time, which we're going to use in a moment here anyhow. The next thing we want to look at is self-myofascial release of the tissues surrounding the knee directly. Now my favorite go-to is voodoo floss because it's kind of an all-in-one approach. When you're doing the voodoo floss, you can wrap from the high calf tissues over the knee directly and right up into those lower quadriceps tissues, which can actually be part of the problem when it comes to tension related pains at the knee. That arch that's just above the knee is a problem area and usually needs some form of self-myofascial release to help relieve some of that knee pain. Now if you don't have access to voodoo floss, you can also use foam rolling of the tissues of the quadriceps, and you can do, once again, a softball at the back of the knee to create that flexion gapping and self-myofascial release effect at the back of the knee. So you actually have a few options there that you can go with to create these effects that we're looking at to help restore those tissues around the knee joint itself. The final thing we want to look at is muscle dynamics. So am I able to activate the muscle tissues that I should be able to in these positions that replicate what I'm doing in a squat? One of my favorites that I like to go to for this is an adductor rock. So this is actually deactivating those hip adductors while allowing you to activate the hip flexors and even those external rotators in the glutes. All right, and as promised, I've got a bonus for you today. 2 of my favorite core activation exercises for the squat specifically. The first is the Spanish squat, and I like this one because it helps you activate not only those external rotators in the glutes when squatting into the bottom position, but also those quadriceps, which really help you push through to that top position. I recommend trying one set of about 5 reps just with a band that's maybe like 50 to 75 pounds, so you can feel that activation of the quadriceps, of the glutes, and you can really groove and grease that movement before ever going into the true lift itself, if you're doing a heavy back squat or heavy front squat, whatever it might be. The other one is a standing plank. This is a great way to replicate that top position that we're trying to create, where the glutes are locked in, stabilizing the pelvis, the abs are engaged, and the shoulders are externally rotated with the thoracic spinal column very well supported as well. Neck in a neutral position. So between these two movements, they're able to recreate pretty much the whole squat pattern while activating those muscles neurologically before ever going into the heavy lift itself. Now with that standing plank, I recommend doing about 30 seconds of your max hold. So it's all about max tension for a short amount of time, and then we're taking it into the real lift itself from there. And I can guarantee it's actually going to help you improve your performance better than doing a warm-up set of the same movement to begin with, because you're not truly neurologically priming those muscles by doing those lighter warm-up sets. Here, we're able to use RNT to actually create the effect that we want neurologically. There you guys have it. If you guys like this video, make sure you take a moment to let me know by clicking that fat like button down below, and share it with a friend. You know they need this to help fix those knee pains. Just get it over to them. Leave a comment below letting me know the knee pain that you've been dealing with, and if you have any questions about the mobilities or exercises that I've mentioned today in the video. I'd love to answer those questions for you. Drop it below in the comments. If you haven't already, make sure you take a moment and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future content like this. We're talking resolving pain, preventing injury, and human performance every Thursday. So get on that and hit that little bell notification too. If you want something a little bit more tailored to you, make sure you take a moment to drop by the website and grab your free 1-hour strategy call. It's 1 hour focused on you, your goals, and the path that you need to take to get there. So take advantage of that. I hope to hear from you guys soon. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.